The boardroom stretched before him like a battlefield, glass walls reflecting the Manhattan skyline in fractured shards of late afternoon light. Nathaniel Ashford stood at the head of the table, 48 years of hard-won authority carved into the set of his shoulders, watching FBI agents fan out behind Victoria Whitmore's chair. Her smile was ice and triumph, the kind that came from believing she'd already won. Through the glass, his daughter's face. Meredith, 30 years old and breaking apart, pressed against the barrier, her palm flat against the surface, mouth forming words he couldn't hear but understood in his marrow. "How could you?" Dad inside Cassandra Monroe held a manila folder against her chest like armor, 29 years old, and carrying proof that could save him or condemn them both. Victoria's laugh cut through the tension, sharp enough to draw blood. The lead agent reached for his cuffs. Everything froze. The image held for 3 seconds, suspended in amber before the frame shattered backward through time. 3 months earlier, Nathaniel Ashford had never heard Cassandra Monroe's name spoken aloud in his presence, though he'd seen her face exactly once, a blonde blur in a graduation crowd 7 years back, someone who'd roomed with Meredith during their college days. A footnote. A ghost of a memory that had no business haunting him. The Sterling Industries Tower rose 63 floors above Midtown steel and glass, and the kind of money that came from bleeding for every dollar. Nate's office occupied the corner of the 58th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, framing a view he'd earned by spending his 20s covered in construction dust and his 30s outworking everyone who'd bet against a foreman with ambition. The lucky steel beam piece from his first project, a 6-inch length of I-beam still flecked with orange rust, hung mounted on the wall behind his desk. Visitors often asked about it. He never explained. The intercom crackled. His assistant's voice carried the particular tone reserved for calls from his daughter. Meredith's voice filled the speaker, warm and immediate. She'd inherited her mother's ability to make distance feel irrelevant, to collapse the 300 miles between Manhattan and Boston into nothing. "Dad, I need a favor. Cass is doing a story on construction industry corruption, and she needs someone credible to interview. Someone clean." Nate's pen stopped mid-signature on a contract worth 8 figures. The name meant nothing. Cass. Short for something probably. Cassidy maybe. Cassiopeia if her parents were pretentious. "Your college roommate." A pause just long enough to suggest Meredith was choosing her words. "Yeah. She's freelance now doing investigative work. Really good at it. But Dad..." Her voice shifted, took on an edge he recognized from childhood, from every time she'd tried to protect him from something. "Please don't let her dig into Sterling. I know you're clean, but she's thorough. Once she gets a scent, she doesn't let go." The warning landed with the weight of prophecy. Nate glanced at the steel beam on his wall, at the stack of contracts representing $4 billion of honest work, at the empty chair across from his desk, where his business partner used to sit before he'd fired her for crossing lines he'd drawn in permanent ink. "I'll talk to her. When?" "Tomorrow, 2 p.m. I already told her you'd make time." The call ended. Nate returned to his contract, but the signature came out jagged, the letters misshapen. A man's word defines him. His father had beaten that into him, along with a dozen other lessons delivered with fists and belt leather. The old man had died broke and mean, everything Nate had sworn never to become. Every contract he signed, every handshake deal, every promise made was a repudiation of the bastard who'd given him life and nothing else worth keeping. His phone buzzed. A text from Robert Brennan, his CFO board meeting moved to Thursday. Victoria's name came up. "Someone's buying our stock." Nate's jaw tightened. Victoria Whitmore. 15 years since he'd dissolved their partnership, 15 years since she'd walked out of this building promising to bury him someday. She'd been brilliant and ruthless and willing to cut corners he refused to approach. Firing her had cost him a year of sleepless nights and a hostile lawsuit that had nearly destroyed everything he'd built. But he'd won. Barely. The fact that her name was surfacing now attached to stock purchases meant she'd finally found her angle. He typed back, locked down the numbers. "I want to know who's moving our shares." The city sprawled below, indifferent to the small wars fought in its towers. Somewhere in that grid of steel and ambition, a journalist named Cass was preparing questions designed to expose weakness. Meredith trusted her. That should have been enough. It wasn't. Cassandra Monroe arrived at Sterling Industries at 1:57 p.m., 3 minutes early in a navy blazer and heels that added 2 inches to a frame that didn't need them. The receptionist directed her to the elevator bank, and she rode up in silence, watching the floor numbers climb while her reflection stared back from polished brass. 29 years old. Freelance for 6 months after the newspaper had gutted its investigative division. Student loans she'd be paying until she was 50. A red notebook in her bag that her father had carried on every job site before the pension fund he'd paid into for 30 years had vanished into corporate bankruptcy. The elevator opened onto glass and chrome and the kind of wealth that insulated itself from consequences. A assistant led her through the space past junior executives who didn't look up from their screens toward the corner office where windows replaced walls. Nathaniel Ashford stood when she entered, and the recognition hit like voltage. 7 years collapsed into nothing. Meredith's graduation, Columbia University, a humid June afternoon, thick with the smell of cut grass and sunscreen. She'd been 22, hungover from the previous night's party, squinting against the sun, while Meredith's father, this man though younger than 41 and already commanding space like he owned it, had shaken her hand and congratulated her with the kind of generic warmth adults dispense to their children's friends. She'd felt the heat of his palm, the brief pressure of fingers that had built things, and spent the rest of the ceremony trying not to stare. Now he was 48 silver, threading through dark hair at the temples lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled less than he used to. The blazer was custom. The watch understated the whole presentation, calculated to project competence without ostentation. He succeeded. His hand extended across the desk. "Ms. Monroe, Meredith speaks highly of you." The touch lasted 2 seconds. Cass pulled back first, gripping her notebook like a lifeline. "Mr. Ashford, thank you for making time." "Nate," he gestured to a chair. "Meredith mentioned you're investigating construction corruption. Broad topic." Cass settled into the leather spine-straight recorder visible on the desk between them. Professional. Distant. Ignore the way his attention felt like a physical weight. "I'm focusing on pension fund mismanagement and contractor fraud. Companies that promise worker security then dissolve when it's time to pay out." Something shifted in his expression, a microscopic tightening around his mouth. "That's a story worth telling. What do you need from me?" "Context. Industry perspective. You built Sterling from the ground up, started as a site foreman, correct?" "Welder, actually. Worked my way up." She made a note, though she already knew his history. Everyone in the industry knew the Nathaniel Ashford narrative bootstrap success story, self-made billionaire widower who'd raised his daughter alone after cancer, took his wife. The kind of clean biography that was either genuine or meticulously constructed. Her job was determining which. "How common is pension fraud in your experience?" His jaw worked. Seconds passed. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an edge that hadn't been there before. "More common than anyone wants to admit. I've watched companies gut retirement funds to cover executive bonuses. Seen workers lose everything because some CFO decided his yacht was more important than honoring contracts. Sterling's pension fund is fully funded. Above the legal requirement. Has been since we established it." He leaned back, arms crossed. "You can verify that with our auditors. I'll have my assistant send you the contact information." "Too easy, too clean." Cass pressed. "What about your former business partner, Victoria Whitmore? She left Sterling under disputed circumstances 15 years ago." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Nate's posture didn't change, but his eyes went flat, the warmth leaching out until he looked like something carved from granite. "Victoria Whitmore hasn't been associated with Sterling Industries for 15 years. Whatever you're digging up, she's not part of this company." "But she was. For 5 years you built Sterling together. Then she was gone and you never took another partner." "Victoria had a different vision for what Sterling should be. We disagreed. She left." Cass waited. Silence was a journalist's best weapon. People filled it. Nate didn't. He stared at her expression, unreadable, until the quiet stretched into something uncomfortable. Finally, "Is there anything else?" She'd hit a nerve. Good. That meant there was something to find. But pushing now would shut him down completely. Cass shifted tactics, softening her voice. Your wife. She passed away 8 years ago. The question landed like a blade between ribs. For a moment she thought he'd ask her to leave. Then something in his face cracked, just a hairline fracture quickly sealed. Ovarian cancer, 16 months from diagnosis to... He stopped. Started again. Meredith was 22, same age you were when we met. The acknowledgement surprised her. He remembered. 7 years, a 10-second handshake, and he remembered. I'm sorry. The words came out genuine, unscripted. That must have been... It was. He stood sudden enough to suggest the interview was over. But instead of showing her out, he moved to the window, hands in his pockets, shoulders tight. You asked how common pension fraud is. My father was a construction worker. Died at 56 with nothing. The company he'd worked for his entire adult life declared bankruptcy 2 weeks before his pension vested. Legal loophole. He died broke and bitter, and I swore I'd never let that happen to anyone who worked for me. Cass's pen stilled. This wasn't interview patter. This was something real, something he'd given her without her having to excavate it. Is that why you started Sterling? Part of it. He turned back and the light from the window backlit him, turned him into silhouette. The rest was wanting to prove I wasn't him, that I could build something that lasted, that my word meant something. A man's word defines him. The phrase rose unbidden in her mind, something her own father used to say before the pension fund vanished, and he'd spent his last 5 years fighting a legal battle he couldn't win. The parallel made her chest tight. Nate checked his watch. I have another meeting, but if you need industry context background on how these schemes work, I'll make time. Meredith said you're thorough. I respect that. Cass gathered her recorder, her notebook standing on legs that felt less steady than they should. I appreciate your candor. Most CEOs I interview stick to PR scripts. I'm not most CEOs. The words carried no arrogance, just statement of fact. He walked her to the door, and she became acutely aware of the space between them, the way his presence seemed to compress the air. At the threshold he paused. One more thing. Whatever you find about Victoria, whatever she's involved in now, be careful. She's brilliant and vindictive, and she doesn't forgive. The warning hung in the air. Cass met his eyes, saw something there that looked like concern. For her, for his company. Both. I'm always careful. His mouth quirked, not quite a smile. Meredith said the same thing before she chose journalism over law school. Clearly it runs in the friendship. The elevator ride down felt longer than the ascent. Cass stood alone in the brass-lined box, watching floor numbers decrease, trying to catalog the interview's contents. 40 minutes of conversation, 3 usable quotes. One warning about Victoria Whitmore that felt more personal than professional. And underneath it all, a current she hadn't expected, attraction immediate and unwelcome, the kind that made her skin feel too tight. She'd felt it at graduation, too. Standing in the sun, 22, and stupid, shaking hands with Meredith's father and thinking thoughts that had no business existing. She'd buried it. 7 years of distance, of career focus, of dating men her own age who didn't look at her like she was a puzzle they couldn't quite solve. Now it was back, amplified by proximity and the low rasp of his voice when he'd talked about his wife, about his father, about the weight of promises kept. Her phone buzzed. Meredith. How'd it go? Dad behave himself, Cass typed back. Professional. Helpful. Thanks for the connection. The response came immediately. Told you he's one of the good ones. Dinner Friday. I'm coming down from Boston. The idea of sitting across from Meredith, pretending she hadn't spent the last hour cataloging the way her father's hands looked when he gripped the window frame, felt impossible. But she typed, absolutely. Can't wait. Outside Sterling Tower, the afternoon traffic had thickened into gridlock. Cass walked north, letting the noise and motion scrub away the residue of the interview. She had work to do. Victoria Whitmore's name had appeared in 3 separate pension fraud cases, always tangentially, never quite actionable. If Nate had fired her for ethical violations, there might be documentation, a paper trail that could connect dots. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. The voice on the other end was female, smooth professional. Ms. Monroe, this is Victoria Whitmore. I understand you're writing about construction industry practices. I'd very much like to speak with you. Cass stopped walking. Around her, pedestrians flowed past like water around a stone. How did you get this number? I make it my business to know who's asking questions about me. You interviewed Nathaniel Ashford this afternoon. I imagine he painted quite a picture. A pause, deliberate. I'd like to offer you the other side of the story. Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., my office in Tribeca. I'll send the address. The line went dead. Cass stood on the corner of 5th and 43rd, holding her phone, feeling the shape of the trap closing around her. Victoria Whitmore didn't call journalists out of civic duty. She called them to control the narrative, to spin whatever story served her interests. But declining the meeting meant walking away from the biggest lead she'd had in months. The text arrived 30 seconds later. An address. A time. No pleasantries. She was still standing there debating when her phone rang again. Nate's number. Meredith must have given it to her years ago, stored under Mer's dad in her contacts. His voice came through rough, urgent. Don't meet with her. Whatever she offered, it's bait. How did you... Victoria's assistant is dating my head of security. Word travels. Cass, I'm serious. She's dangerous. The use of her first name sent heat through her sternum. Cass forced her voice level. I'm a journalist. I don't turn down interviews. Then let me come with you. That's... She stopped, took a breath. Why would you do that? Silence stretched. When he finally answered, his voice had dropped to something quieter, more raw. Because I've spent 15 years watching Victoria destroy people who got in her way. Because Meredith would never forgive me if something happened to you. Because... Another pause, longer this time. Because I gave you my word I'd help and I don't break promises. Something in her chest cracked open. Stupid. Dangerous. Exactly the kind of complication she couldn't afford. But she heard herself saying, 10 a.m. Tribeca, I'll text you the address. I'll be there. The call ended. Cass resumed walking, legs moving on autopilot while her brain tried to process the geometry of what she'd just agreed to. Nathaniel Ashford, billionaire CEO, her best friend's father, inserting himself into her investigation, offering protection she hadn't asked for against a threat she didn't fully understand. The red notebook in her bag seemed to pulse with weight. Her father's handwriting filled the pages, job sites, dates, the name of the company that had stolen his future. She'd been chasing that story for 6 months, following threads that always led nowhere. Now she had Victoria Whitmore offering an interview, and Nathaniel Ashford offering backup, and the whole thing felt like standing on ice that was already cracking under her feet. That night in her studio apartment in Brooklyn, Cass spread her notes across the kitchen table. Victoria Whitmore's name appeared in documents connected to 3 collapsed pension funds. Always peripheral, always just outside the blast radius when companies imploded. The pattern was too clean to be coincidence, too careful to be accidental. Her laptop chimed. Email from Nate's assistant, per Mr. Ashford's request attached are Sterling Industries pension fund audit reports for the past 15 years, as well as contact information for our independent auditors. Please let me know if you need anything else. Cass opened the attachments. Page after page of numbers, all showing a fund that was overfunded, carefully managed, exactly what Nate had claimed. She cross-referenced against industry standards. Sterling's pension obligations exceeded legal requirements by 30%. Either Nate was the rarest kind of CEO or he was very good at covering tracks. She wanted to believe the former. That impulse alone should have been a red flag. Her phone lit up. Text from Meredith. Dad just called. Said you're meeting with his nightmare ex-partner tomorrow, WTF Cass. Cass stared at the screen. The responsible answer was to explain this was journalism, that she chased every lead that Meredith's father had volunteered to accompany her. Instead, she typed, "It's complicated. I'll explain Friday." The reply came fast. "You better. And be careful. Dad's weird about Victoria. Like restraining order levels of weird." That detail hadn't appeared in any public record. Cass made a note. Restraining order. When three dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, years ago. Around the time they split, she tried to claim he sabotaged her career. Court dismissed it. Dad never talks about it. Cass's pulse kicked up. A dismissed restraining order meant court documents sealed or public depending on the state and year. If Victoria had accused Nate of sabotage in legal filings, there would be specifics allegations that might reveal what had actually fractured their partnership. She pulled up New York's court database, started searching. The case took 15 minutes to find buried under Victoria's maiden name. The filing was public record. The dismissal had come with prejudice, meaning Victoria couldn't refile, but the initial complaint was still accessible. Cass read it twice, making notes. Victoria had accused Nathaniel Ashford of stealing proprietary client lists, spreading false rumors about her competence, and using his industry connections to blacklist her from major contracts. The language was scorched earth, full of phrases like calculated destruction and professional assassination. Nate's response, filed by his attorney, had been iceberg cold. A point-by-point refutation backed by emails showing Victoria had attempted to bribe inspectors, had falsified safety reports, had endangered workers to meet deadlines. The evidence had been damning enough that the judge had not only dismissed Victoria's claims, but had issued a written opinion suggesting she was lucky not to face criminal charges. 15 years ago, Nathaniel Ashford had ended Victoria Whitmore's career to protect his workers and his reputation. She'd spent the next decade and a half rebuilding in the shadows, acquiring shell companies, moving money through layers of corporate structure designed to obscure ownership. Now she was buying sterling stock and calling journalists. Cass closed her laptop. Tomorrow's meeting had just shifted from interview to confrontation, and Nate knew it. That's why he'd insisted on coming. Not to control the narrative, but because Victoria's invitation was a declaration of war, and he wasn't going to let Cass walk into the crossfire alone. The realization should have annoyed her. She'd built her career on independence, on not needing backup or protection. Instead, she felt something warmer, more dangerous. Gratitude. Trust. The beginning of something that had no business beginning. She pulled out her phone, typed a message to Nate. "Thanks for the audit reports. See you tomorrow." The response came 30 seconds later. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be ugly." Then after a pause, another message. "And Cass, I meant what I said. I don't break promises." She stared at those words until her screen went dark. Sleep came late, and restless, full of dreams about glass towers and falling numbers, about her father's handwriting in a red notebook, and a man with silver at his temples who looked at her like she was something worth protecting. She woke at 6, showered in water too cold, and dressed in armor-black suit, minimal jewelry, the notebook in her bag, like a talisman. The cab ride to Tribeca took 40 minutes through morning traffic. Nate was already there, standing outside the address Victoria had provided. Hands in his coat pockets, expression unreadable. He looked like he hadn't slept either. Cass paid the driver, stepped onto the sidewalk. The building was new construction, all glass and steel, the kind of anonymous luxury that housed hedge funds and law firms. Victoria's office was on the 20th floor. Nate's eyes tracked over her quick assessment. "You ready for this? Are you?" His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. Not even a little. They rode the elevator in silence. Cass watched the numbers climb, acutely aware of the man beside her, of the tension radiating off him in waves. At the 19th floor he spoke. "Whatever she says in there, whatever she offers or threatens or implies, don't react. She's playing a game and she's very good at it." Cass turned to face him. 6 inches separated them in the small space. She could see the silver in his stubble, the faint scar above his left eyebrow, the way his jaw worked like he was chewing words he wouldn't release. "Why does she hate you so much?" The elevator chimed. 20th floor, doors sliding open. Nate stepped out first, turned back. His voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. "Because I wouldn't let her win." Victoria Whitmore's receptionist was young and efficient, directing them to a conference room with a view of the Hudson. The woman herself entered 3 minutes later, 52 years old, and dressed in a way that suggested she'd aged into her power rather than fought against it. Her handshake was firm, her smile cold. "Nathaniel, it's been too long." Nate didn't return the smile. "Victoria." Her attention shifted to Cass, sharpened. "Ms. Monroe, thank you for coming. I trust my former partner hasn't poisoned the well too thoroughly. I form my own opinions." Cass set her recorder on the table. "You said you wanted to tell your side of the story. I'm listening." Victoria settled into a chair, crossed her legs. Everything about her posture suggested control, from the angle of her spine to the deliberate way she folded her hands. 15 years ago, Nathaniel Ashford destroyed my career because I refused to be complicit in his corner-cutting. He's built an empire on the myth of integrity, but the foundation is rotted through. I have proof." Nate's hand curled into a fist on the table. Cass spoke before he could. "What kind of proof?" "Financial records showing Sterling Industries has been systematically underfunding its pension obligations for the past decade. Safety violations covered up by bribing inspectors. A pattern of worker exploitation hidden behind PR and charity donations." Victoria slid a folder across the table. "It's all documented. Names, dates, dollar amounts." Cass opened the folder. Page after page of spreadsheets, emails, incident reports. Her eyes caught on a name she recognized, the company that had gutted her father's pension fund. Sterling Industries listed as a subcontractor on 3 major projects. Her blood went cold. Nate leaned forward, voice tight with controlled fury. "That's fabricated. All of it. Cass, don't... Is it..." Victoria's smile widened. "Or is it just inconvenient, Ms. Monroe? I believe your father worked for Kellerman Construction, correct? Lost his pension when they collapsed in 2018. The room tilted. Cass gripped the edge of the table. "How did you know that?" "Because I make it my business to know who I'm dealing with. Your father's case was tragic. Kellerman was a nightmare of mismanagement and fraud. But dig deeper, Ms. Monroe. Look at who Kellerman subcontracted to. Look at who walked away clean when the pension fund evaporated." Cass's hands shook. She forced them, still forced her voice level. "You're saying Sterling was involved." "I'm saying Nathaniel has a gift for positioning himself just outside the blast radius, for looking heroic while others burn." Victoria leaned back. "But you're a journalist. You don't have to take my word for it. Verify, investigate, see what you find." Nate stood. His chair scraped against the floor, violent in the quiet. "We're done here." "Nathaniel, sit down. We're just getting started." "No, we're not." He looked at Cass, and something in his expression made her chest ache. Not anger, hurt. The kind that came from being falsely accused by someone who mattered. "Cass, that folder is poison. She's counting on you being too emotionally compromised to fact-check. Don't give her that." Cass stared at the documents spread before her. Her father's company name in black and white connected to Sterling Industries through a web of subcontracts. It could be real. It could be manufactured. She had no way to know without hours of verification, and Victoria knew it. She closed the folder, met Victoria's eyes. "I'll look into this. But if you've lied to me, if you've fabricated evidence, I'll bury you in print." Victoria's smile didn't waver. "I look forward to reading your work, Ms. Monroe. Nathaniel, always a pleasure." They left. The elevator ride down was silent. Nate's jaw locked, Cass clutching the folder like it might explode. On the street he finally spoke. "She's lying. About Kellerman, about Sterling, about all of it. But she's good. She'll have just enough truth mixed in to make you doubt." Cass turned to face him. Morning light cut harsh angles across his face, made him look older, wearier. "My father's name is in those documents." "I know. And I'm sorry. But Cass..." He stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to hold his gaze. "I swear on everything I am..." "Sterling had nothing to do with Kellerman's collapse. We subcontracted 2 projects, both completed years before they went under. I can prove it. Let me prove it." She wanted to believe him. That impulse was a warning bell she couldn't ignore. Why would she target me specifically? Why use my father? Because she knows Meredith sent you to me, because using you hurts me and discredits anything you write defending Sterling. It's elegant, It's vicious. It's exactly her style. Cass's phone buzzed. Text from Meredith. Dad said you met with Victoria. Call me now. The geometry of betrayal was closing in. Cass looked at Nate, at the man who'd opened his books and his history, who'd warned her about Victoria and shown up to protect her anyway. Then she looked at the folder in her hands, at her father's legacy reduced to a line item in someone else's war. I need to verify everything, all of it. Sterling's records, Victoria's claims, the Kellerman connection, and I need to do it alone. Something flickered across Nate's face. Disappointment. Resignation. He nodded slowly. Understood. But Cass, when you find out she's lying, and you will come to me. Let me help you expose her. Why? The question came out sharper than intended. Why do you care what I think? I'm just Meredith's friend, just some journalist you met yesterday. The words hung between them. Nate was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made her ribs feel too small. Because when you walked into my office yesterday, you looked at me like I was someone worth trusting. Not because of what I'd built or how much I was worth, but because you saw something real. And He stopped, started again. I haven't felt seen like that in 8 years. So yes, I care what you think, more than I should. More than makes sense after one interview and one ambush meeting, but I do. The confession landed like a physical blow. Cass felt her breath catch, felt the street tilt under her feet. Around them the city moved taxis, honking pedestrians flowing past delivery trucks double-parked and hazarding traffic. None of it mattered. She should walk away, should take the folder, do her job, maintain professional distance. Instead, she heard herself say, Meredith's coming to town Friday. She wants to have dinner, all three of us. Nate's expression shifted, surprise bleeding into something warmer. All three of us. If you're free, I'll make myself free. They stood there, two people who'd known each other for less than 24 hours, on a Tribeca sidewalk with a folder full of potential evidence between them and a woman in a tower above plotting their destruction. And despite every rational objection Cass could muster, despite the professional ethics screaming warnings in her skull, she felt the first real spark of something that would either save them both or burn everything to ash. The folder sat on Cass's kitchen table through Thursday night and all of Friday. 36 hours of cross-referencing financial records, pulling permits, tracking payment schedules through the labyrinth of construction accounting. Her eyes burned from screen glare. Her coffee had gone cold 3 times. The sun was setting over Brooklyn, painting her studio apartment in shades of copper that would have been beautiful if she'd had the capacity to notice. By Friday at 6 p.m., she'd verified 12 of Victoria's claims. 8 were demonstrably false emails, doctored dates, manipulated signatures forged with enough skill that a casual observer would miss the inconsistencies. But 4 checked out. Sterling Industries had subcontracted work for Kellerman Construction on 2 projects in 2016 and 2017, exactly as Victoria's documents claimed. The money trail existed. The connection was real. What remained unclear was whether that connection meant complicity or coincidence. Her phone rang. Unknown number, 917 area code. She answered warily. Ms. Monroe, this is Robert Brennan, CFO at Sterling Industries. Nate Ashford gave me your number. His voice carried the tight control of someone choosing words with surgical precision. I understand you're investigating Victoria Whitmore's allegations. Cass's pulse kicked up. Mr. Ashford shouldn't have involved you without my consent. He didn't. I called him after reading Victoria's documents. She CC'd me on the email she sent you. Wanted to make sure I couldn't corroborate her story. A pause waited. Ms. Monroe, I was there 15 years ago. I saw everything, and what Victoria's claiming, it's fiction wrapped around just enough truth to be dangerous. Then let me interview you, on record. Not yet. Victoria has people watching. If she knows I'm talking to you before your article drops, she'll move to silence me. But after you've verified the timeline, after you've realized her documents don't hold up under scrutiny, call me. I'll tell you everything. The line went dead. Cass stared at her phone, recalculating. Robert Brennan wasn't just Nate's CFO, he was a witness. The witness. And he'd just confirmed Victoria's story had cracks wide enough to drive a truck through. She returned to the documents with renewed focus. If Rob was willing to testify, if Nate's timeline held, then the Kellerman connection needed deeper investigation. She pulled up the subcontracting dates again. Sterling's work had ended 16 months before Kellerman's bankruptcy filing. Long enough that any causal connection would require proof Sterling had known about the pension fund's vulnerability and deliberately structured contracts to avoid liability. Proving that would need internal communications, whistleblower's evidence Victoria hadn't provided. Her phone buzzed. Text from Nate. Still on for dinner tonight. Meredith lands at 4. Cass felt her stomach drop. She'd forgotten. Tonight. Friday. The dinner she'd agreed to before Victoria had weaponized her father's memory, before the investigation had consumed every waking hour, before the geometry of what existed between her and Nate had become impossible to ignore. She typed back, "Yes." "What time?" His response came immediately, 7 p.m. And Cass, "Whatever you found in those documents, we'll deal with it together." The presumption should have annoyed her. Instead, it felt like oxygen. She gathered her notes, showered in water too cold to be comfortable, dressed in the jeans and sweater Meredith had given her. The red notebook went into her bag out of habit, a talisman against uncertainty. The subway ride to Manhattan took 40 minutes. She spent it staring at her reflection in the dark window, trying to reconcile the woman looking back, exhausted, conflicted, attracted to a man whose innocence she couldn't yet prove, with the journalist she'd trained herself to be. Objectivity was supposed to be a shield. Right now, it felt like a prison. Nate's building occupied prime Upper West Side real estate, pre-war elegance, housing new money. The doorman recognized her name, directed her to the penthouse elevator. Private access. Of course. As the elevator climbed, Cass checked her phone one last time. Email from her source at the city permits office. Attached are the Kellerman construction files you requested. Note the inspection dates all clean until 3 months before bankruptcy. Then suddenly, everything fails. Someone was looking the other way, then stopped. Cass opened the attachment, scanned the inspection records. Her breath caught. The inspectors who'd signed off on the clean reports worked for a third-party firm. She cross-referenced the company name against her notes. Victoria's Shell Company. Different name, but the ownership trail led back to her. The elevator doors opened directly into Nate's foyer. He stood there waiting, still in work clothes, but with his tie loosened, looking like he'd had the same kind of day she had. When he saw her face, something in his expression cracked open. "You found something." Cass stepped off the elevator, set down her bag. Victoria's Shell Company provided the inspectors for Kellerman's projects. She was the one looking the other way. When Sterling's contracts ended, she pulled her people, and suddenly everything failed inspection. Kellerman couldn't complete projects, couldn't get bonded, couldn't pay their pension obligations. She orchestrated the collapse and positioned you to take the blame. Cass pulled out her phone, showed him the permit records. "This is what I need Rob to confirm. If he can testify that Victoria controlled those inspection firms, that she deliberately sabotaged Kellerman after Sterling pulled out, he can, he will." Nate's jaw tightened. "Cass, I'm sorry. Sorry you got dragged into this. Sorry Victoria used your father's memory as a weapon. Sorry for all of it. Don't apologize for her crimes." Cass looked up at him, saw the exhaustion etched into his face, the weight of 15 years of fighting Victoria's long game. "You didn't create this mess. You just refused to participate in it." Meredith's voice carried from deeper in the apartment, bright and familiar. "Cass, finally Dad's been stress cooking for 2 hours. I think we're having enough food for 12 people." The normalcy was jarring. Cass followed the sound through an open living space that managed to feel warm despite its size books on shelves, a rumpled blanket on the couch, the lucky steel beam piece mounted on the wall. Beneath it sat a photo of a woman with kind eyes and Meredith's smile. Nate's wife. Dead 8 years and still present in every detail. The kitchen was controlled chaos. Nate returned to the stove, moving between pans with focused intensity. Meredith perched on the counter, bare feet swinging, talking rapid-fire about her delayed flight and the incompetence of airport security. She saw Cass and launched herself off the granite, pulling her into a hug that smelled like vanilla and expensive shampoo. God, I missed you. Boston is full of pretentious lawyers and terrible bagels. Tell me New York hasn't completely fallen apart without me." Cass returned the embrace, surprised by the tightness in her throat. "It's limping along. How's the non-profit? Chronically underfunded and morally exhausting. Perfect." Meredith pulled back, eyes sharp with assessment. "You look like hell. When did you last sleep?" "Tuesday, maybe Wednesday." Nate glanced over his shoulder, something unreadable crossing his face. "Wine's already open. Red on the counter, white in the fridge." Cass opted for red, poured a glass large enough to be honest. The Cabernet was excellent, which figured. She'd brought a $20 bottle from Trader Joe's that remained in her bag, outclassed and unnecessary. Meredith commandeered her, dragging her to the living room while Nate finished whatever elaborate meal he'd engineered. They collapsed onto the couch and Meredith tucked her feet under her in the unconscious way of someone completely comfortable in their surroundings. "Okay, real talk. What's happening with the Victoria situation?" Dad was weirdly cagey on the phone. Cass took a long pull of wine. "She gave me documents. Some check out, some don't. I'm still verifying." "Documents about what?" The question was casual. The answer was a minefield. Cass chose her words carefully. "Pension fund mismanagement. Company collapses. Your father's name came up in connection with one of them." Meredith's expression shifted, lightness draining away. "Came up how?" "Subcontracting work for a company that later went bankrupt and gutted its pension fund." "Let me guess. Victoria implied Dad was somehow responsible." "The contracts exist. The timeline is real. What's less clear is whether it's evidence of wrongdoing or just Victoria being strategic about what she showed me." Meredith set down her wine glass with enough force that liquid sloshed over the rim. "Cass, you can't seriously think my father would steal from workers. He'd cut off his own hand first." "I don't think anything yet. I'm investigating." "You're investigating my dad." The words came out flat, hurt, wrapped in accusation. "Your best friend's father. Based on evidence from a woman who spent 15 years trying to destroy him." Cass felt the friendship fracturing and real-time fault lines appearing in a foundation she'd thought was solid. "Mir, I'm a journalist. I have to follow every lead, even the uncomfortable ones. Especially the uncomfortable ones. Even if it means betraying people who trust you." The question landed like a fist. Before Cass could respond, Nate's voice cut through from the kitchen, quiet but carrying an edge that suggested he'd been listening. "Meredith, she's doing her job. Don't make her choose between that and you." Meredith stood, walked to the kitchen doorway. Cass couldn't see her face, but she heard the thickness in her voice. "Dad, she thinks you're involved in pension fraud. She thinks you helped steal from workers like Grandpa. She thinks Victoria gave her evidence that needs verification. There's a difference." Nate wiped his hands on a towel, met Cass's eyes across the open space. "And she's right to be thorough. If I were in her position, I'd do the same thing." The grace in that response made Cass's chest ache. He was giving her permission to suspect him, to dig into his history, to potentially destroy his reputation, all because he understood the ethics of her profession better than she'd expected. Meredith made a sound somewhere between frustration and resignation. "You're both insane. I'm going to set the table and pretend this is a normal dinner where my best friend isn't investigating my father for crimes he didn't commit." She disappeared into the dining area. Cass remained on the couch, gripping her wine glass, feeling the weight of the investigation pressing down. The temptation to pull out the permit records to show Nate the proof that Victoria had orchestrated everything, to ask him directly about the inspectors. It was overwhelming. But doing that here now with Meredith 3 rooms away felt like a violation of every boundary that still existed. Nate approached, carrying a second glass of wine. He sat on the opposite end of the couch, careful to maintain distance. "She'll forgive you. She's angry because she's protective, but she'll come around." "Will she forgive me if I find out you're guilty?" The bluntness surprised them both. Nate's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "If I'm guilty, I'd deserve whatever you published. But I'm not. And when you finish your investigation, when you've verified every document and chased every thread, you'll know that too." "How can you be so certain I'll clear you?" "Because I'm innocent, and because you're good at what you do." He paused, took a drink. "Also because Victoria makes mistakes when she's angry. She overplays her hand. Those 4 contracts that check out, look at when Sterling completed the work versus when Kellerman collapsed. Look at who provided their inspectors. Cass had looked. The timeline exonerated Sterling. The inspectors condemned Victoria. But hearing Nate articulate it confirmed he'd been thinking through her investigation as carefully as she had. You already knew I'd find the inspection records. I've had 36 hours of watching you not text me back. I thought through everything. His voice dropped, took on an intimacy that didn't belong in a room where his daughter could walk in any second. Cass, I know you need to verify. I know you can't just take my word, but please understand I'm not asking you to trust me blindly. I'm asking you to trust your own judgment. Look at the evidence, all of it, not just what Victoria fed you. The proximity was dangerous. 3 feet of expensive couch separated them, but the air felt charged heavy with things neither of them could say. Cass set down her wine before she did something stupid like close that distance. I need to interview Rob without you present. Something flickered in Nate's expression, surprise or hurt or both, but he nodded. He's expecting your call, probably tomorrow morning if I know him. He won't wait long once he knows you're ready. And I need access to Sterling's complete records from 2015 to 2018, everything related to Kellerman Construction. You'll have it Monday morning. Why are you making this so easy? Nate leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Because the truth is easy. Lying takes effort. And because... He stopped, started again. Because when you walked into my office Tuesday, you looked at me like I was someone worth trusting. Not because of what I'd built or how much I was worth, but because you saw something real. And I haven't felt seen like that in 8 years. The confession landed like a physical blow. Cass felt her breath catch, felt the room tilt. Around them, the apartment held its breath. The city beyond the windows, the dinner cooling on the stove, Meredith setting the table in the next room. None of it mattered. She should walk away, should maintain professional distance. Instead, she heard herself say, "Stop looking at me like that." Like what? Like I'm something you want, but can't have. The silence that followed was atomic. Nate stared at her, and the naked honesty in his eyes made her forget how to breathe. You're Meredith's best friend. You're 29. I'm 48. You're investigating my company. There are approximately 900 reasons I shouldn't want you. He met her gaze, held it. Doesn't change the fact that I do. Meredith's voice carried from the dining room. Dinner's getting cold. Are you two having a therapy session, or are we eating? Cass stood too fast, nearly knocked over her wine. Nate rose more slowly, his expression shuddering back into something neutral. They navigated to the dining room in careful silence. The meal should have been awkward. Instead, it settled into something almost comfortable. Meredith dominated conversation, filling gaps with stories about her nonprofit's latest disaster and complaints about Boston's dating scene. Nate interjected occasionally dry observations that made his daughter laugh. Watching them together hurt in unexpected ways. The ease of their rapport, the obvious love, the way Meredith could make her father smile with a badly timed joke, it was everything Cass had lost when her own father died. And she was sitting here eating their food, accepting their hospitality, while carrying evidence that could vindicate them or destroy them. Halfway through the meal, Meredith's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, swore softly. Work emergency. I have to take this. Do not finish the tiramisu without me. She disappeared onto the balcony. Through the glass, Cass could see her pacing, gesturing with her free hand in the animated way that meant someone was getting lectured. Alone with Nate, the air pressure changed. He set down his fork, voice quiet. What Victoria told you about me sabotaging her career, did you look up the court case? Cass nodded. Read the whole file, her accusations, your evidence, the judge's opinion. Then you know she tried to destroy me first, that I only fought back because she'd endangered people's lives. I know what the court record says, but you don't know why. Nate pushed his plate aside, leaned back. Victoria and I started Sterling together, equal partners. She had the business connections, I had the construction expertise. For 5 years it worked. Then we bid on a project that would have doubled our revenue overnight. Luxury high-rise in Midtown. Huge contract, brutal deadline. He paused, jaw working like the words physically hurt. Victoria wanted to cut corners on safety inspections, hire cheaper labor, skip certain code requirements, bribe the right people to look the other way. She had it all mapped out. Said it was standard practice, that everyone did it, that we'd be fools to pass up the opportunity. You refused. I told her if she moved forward with that plan, I'd report her to every regulatory agency in New York. We had a screaming fight in this apartment. Meredith was 14, home from school, heard the whole thing. Victoria walked out, told me I'd regret choosing morality over money. His hands curled into fists. 3 days later, she filed the restraining order. Cass absorbed this, slotting pieces into place. You countered with evidence of her bribery scheme. I had emails, recorded conversations, enough to bury her in criminal court. My lawyer convinced me to use it defensively to get the restraining order dismissed with prejudice rather than go on the offensive. Pain threaded through his voice. My wife had been dead 2 years. Meredith was fragile, so I let Victoria walk away with her reputation intact, and I spent the next 15 years rebuilding Sterling into something that could survive without her. The story matched the court records, filled in gaps Cass hadn't been able to bridge, but it was still his version, shaped by his perspective. She needed corroboration. Rob was there. He was our site engineer, 21 years old, fresh out of school. He saw everything. That interview just became priority one. Before Cass could respond, her phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Ms. Monroe, this is Rob Brennan. If you're ready to hear the truth, I can meet you tomorrow morning. 7 a.m., my apartment in Chelsea. Come alone. She showed Nate the screen. He read it, expression unreadable. He's risking a lot by talking to you. Victoria has eyes everywhere. Then why do it? Because some things matter more than safety, and because I've been good to him. Gave him a shot when he was nobody, trusted him when I could have hired someone with decades more experience. Nate's voice went rough. He's loyal, maybe too loyal, but that's who he is. Cass typed back to Rob. I'll be there. Meredith returned from the balcony, face flushed with annoyance. Crisis averted, but I need to catch an early train back tomorrow. Sorry to cut the visit short. The news landed with unexpected weight. Cass had been counting on Meredith's presence as a buffer, a reason to maintain boundaries. Without her, the geometry of what existed between Cass and Nate became harder to navigate. They finished dinner. Meredith insisted on cleaning up, banishing both adults to the living room. Cass found herself back on the couch, Nate in a chair across from her, carefully maintaining distance while the silence stretched. Finally he spoke. I shouldn't have said that earlier, about wanting you. It was inappropriate, but honest. Honesty isn't always appropriate. Cass pulled her feet up onto the couch, wrapped her arms around her knees. When I was 22 at Meredith's graduation, I shook your hand and felt something I had no business feeling. Spent 7 years pretending it was just a stupid crush. Then I walked into your office Tuesday and it was still there, stronger. Nate's knuckles went white against the armrest. Cass, I'm not finished. She met his gaze, held it. You're right. There are 900 reasons this can't happen. But I need you to know, when this investigation is over, when I've cleared your name or destroyed it, when everything professional is resolved, I'm still going to feel this, and I don't know what to do with that. The confession hung between them, too honest, too raw. Nate stood crossed to the window, stared out at the city like it held answers. His reflection in the glass showed a man at war with himself. My wife died in this apartment, in the bedroom down that hall. 16 months of watching cancer consume her, of holding her hand through every treatment, every failed attempt to give us more time. When it finally ended, I promised myself I'd never love anyone that much again. Couldn't survive losing it twice. Cass felt tears prick her eyes. Not for herself, but for the rawness in his voice, for the grief that clearly hadn't finished with him. Meredith's the only person I've let all the way in since. And now you're here, 29 and brilliant, and looking at me like I'm someone worth seeing, and I don't know how to do this. Don't know if I should even try. But the idea of you finishing your investigation and walking away, of never seeing you again except at Meredith's wedding someday, it's unbearable. The kitchen faucet shut off. Meredith's footsteps approached. Nate and Cass rearranged themselves into casual positions by the time she appeared in the doorway. "Okay, I'm exhausted. Cass, you staying or heading back to Brooklyn?" The question was innocent. The answer mattered more than it should. Cass checked her watch. 10:30. She had Rob's interview at 7 a.m. Every rational impulse said leave. "I should go. Early morning tomorrow." Nate stood. "I'll get you a car." "That's not necessary." "It's late. Humor me." While Nate made the call, Meredith walked Cass to the elevator, linking arms in the unconscious intimacy of a decade of friendship. "Hey, I'm sorry I snapped earlier about the investigation. You're doing your job. I know Dad's clean, so I shouldn't be worried. Mir, if I find something..." "You won't. But if you do, you publish it. I'd expect nothing less." She squeezed Cass's arm. "Just be careful, okay, with the investigation with Victoria, with..." She paused, something shifting in her expression. "Just be careful." The elevator arrived. Nate appeared with her coat, helped her into it with old-fashioned courtesy that should have felt antiquated but didn't. His hands lingered on her shoulders, thumb brushing the base of her neck. "Monday. I'll have answers by Monday." Her voice came out rougher than intended. "Take the time you need." He didn't step back. "But Cass, when you finish verifying when you know I'm telling the truth, don't make me wait another 7 years. The confession hung between them. Downstairs, a black town car waited. Cass rode to Brooklyn in silence, watching streetlights blur past, trying to process the evening. Professional boundaries had dissolved somewhere between dinner and confession. She was writing an article that would vindicate him, but she was also crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Her phone buzzed. Text from Nate. "Thank you for coming tonight, for giving me a chance to explain, for being honest even when it complicated everything." She typed back, "Thank you for the dinner, and for not making me choose between friendship and truth." His response came as the car pulled up to her building. "You shouldn't have to choose. Anyone who asks you to isn't worth your time." Rob Brennan's apartment was a fourth-floor walk-up in Chelsea, a building that had seen better decades. Cass arrived at 6:55 a.m., climbed stairs that smelled like old cooking oil and broken dreams. He answered before she could knock eyes bloodshot, still wearing yesterday's clothes. "Get inside." The apartment was small, cluttered with technical manuals and empty coffee cups. Rob locked the door behind her, checked the window blinds. "Victoria called me at midnight, offered me $2 million to corroborate her story about Nate. When I refused, she threatened to destroy my career, my family, everything." Cass pulled out her recorder. "I need you to tell me everything, from the beginning." For the next 90 minutes, Robert Brennan laid out the truth. The bribery scheme Victoria had orchestrated, the safety violations she'd approved, the moment Nate had discovered it and confronted her. Rob had been there for all of it, fresh out of school and terrified of losing his job, watching his bosses destroy a partnership over questions of ethics versus profit. Nate could have buried her, had enough evidence to put her in prison for a decade. Instead, he let her walk because Meredith begged him to end it. That's the kind of man he is. Rob's hands shook as he produced a thumb drive. "This is 12 years of financial records. Victoria's shell companies, the real money trails, proof she's been sabotaging pension funds and positioning Nate to take the blame. Everything you need to expose her." Cass took the drive like it might burn her. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because Victoria owns people in the FBI, but she doesn't own the press. You publish this, make it public, she can't make it disappear." Rob met her eyes. "And because Nate's been good to me, gave me a shot when I was nobody. I owe him everything." And Cass left with the thumb drive and enough material to write the most explosive story of her career. She also left with certainty that exposing Victoria would make her a target that journalism sometimes required standing in the blast radius. Her phone buzzed as she hit the street. Text from Nate. "Rob just called. Said you have what you need. Are you okay?" She typed, "I'm okay. And I believe you. I believe all of it." The response came immediately. "Thank God." "When can I see you?" Professional boundaries screamed warnings. But Cass had spent 36 hours verifying innocence and 7 years denying attraction. She was done being careful. She typed, "Your place, tonight. We need to talk." His reply was instant, "Yes." The article took 8 hours to write. Cass poured everything into it. Victoria's shell companies, the pension fund schemes, the manufactured evidence against Sterling Robb's testimony, the court records from 15 years ago. She documented the pattern, connected dots spanning more than a decade, built a case that was airtight and devastating. By 6 p.m. she had 5,000 words of journalism that would end Victoria Whitmore's career and clear Nathaniel Ashford's name. She also had a decision to make about what came next. Cass sent the article to her editor with a note: embargo until Monday 6 a.m. "This one's going to explode." Her editor's response came in minutes. "Holy shit. This is incredible. Also potentially career-ending if you're wrong. You're sure about the sources?" Cass typed. "Verified everything 3 times. Run it." Then she grabbed the red notebook, the thumb drive, and headed uptown. The elevator ride to Nate's penthouse felt like ascending toward judgment. The doors opened. He stood there still in work clothes, looking like he hadn't slept. When he saw her face, something in his expression cracked open. "You found the truth." Cass stepped off the elevator, set down her bag. "Victoria's going down. The article publishes Monday. Everything she built, all the shell companies, the fraud, the sabotage, it's over." Nate closed the distance in 3 strides, pulled her into an embrace that felt like absolution and ignition simultaneously. She fit against him in ways that defied geometry, her face pressed to his chest, his arms around her like he could shield her from what came next. "Thank you," his voice rumbled through his ribs, "for believing me, for finding the truth." Cass pulled back enough to see his face. "I didn't do it for you. I did it because people deserve to know when they're being stolen from." Liar. No heat in the word, just weary affection. "You did it for both reasons, and that's okay." The honesty gutted her. Cass felt the last of her professional detachment shatter. "Nate, when this publishes Monday, when Victoria retaliates, it's going to get ugly. The media will dissect every interaction we've had. If they find out about," she gestured between them, "about this, then let them find out." He cupped her face, tilted her head back. "I'm tired of hiding, tired of pretending I don't feel what I feel. You cleared my name. The rest is just noise." "It's not just noise. Your board, your reputation, Meredith. We'll deal with it, or won't. But I'm not giving you up because some gossip columnist wants to make our age gap into a scandal." Cass rose on her toes and kissed him. No hesitation, no second-guessing. Just the culmination of 7 years of denying what she'd felt, and 3 days of choosing truth over convenience. Nate froze for half a heartbeat, then kissed her back with the intensity of someone who'd been holding back too long. His hands tangled in her hair, angled her head to deepen the kiss. She tasted coffee and desperation, and the particular flavor of someone choosing to leap despite knowing the fall might destroy them both. When they finally broke apart, breathing hard, Nate's forehead rested against hers. "This is a terrible idea. I know. Meredith will hate us. The media will have a field day. Your career might not survive the backlash." Cass gripped his collar, held him close. I know all of it. But I've spent 7 years being careful, being professional, doing the right thing. And I'm tired. I'm tired of pretending I don't feel this." Nate's thumb traced her jawline. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying when this article drops Monday, Victoria's going to come after both of us anyway. Might as well give her a real reason." The smile that broke across his face was sunlight through storm clouds. He kissed her again, slower this time, deliberate. A promise and a goodbye to the safety of pretending. "You're sure? Because once we cross this line, there's no going back." "I'm sure. Are you?" Nate pulled her closer, eliminating space. "I haven't been sure of anything in 8 years. But this, it's the first thing that's felt right since—" He stopped, recalibrated. "It feels right. That's enough." They stood there in his foyer while Manhattan glittered beyond the windows, and Monday approached with all the inevitability of gravity. Cass knew this was the moment her life divided into before and after. Before she'd been careful, professional, safe. After would be messier, more painful, more honest. She chose after with both hands and no regrets. The article went live at 6 a.m. Monday. By 6:15, Cass's phone had rung 37 times. She silenced it lying in Nate's bed with his arm around her waist, watching dawn break over Manhattan through windows that didn't need curtains this high up. They'd spent the weekend in this apartment, 72 hours of pretending the world outside didn't exist, that Monday wouldn't arrive with consequences neither of them could fully predict. Now Monday was here, and the consequences were already detonating. Nate's phone joined the chorus. He reached for it, scrolled through notifications with the kind of grim focus that came from decades of crisis management. Board's calling an emergency meeting. Victoria's attorneys have issued a statement denying everything, and, he stopped, jaw tightening. Meredith's called 4 times. Cass felt ice flood her veins. They'd agreed to tell Meredith together in person after the article published, give her the truth before the media circus made it impossible to separate fact from speculation. But 4 calls at dawn suggested someone had already reached her, had already poisoned the well. I'll call her back. Nate's hand covered hers. We do it together, like we planned. The response came through voicemail, Meredith's voice tight with something between fury and heartbreak. Dad, Cass, I don't know which of you to call first, so I'm calling both. A friend just sent me the article. Brilliant work, Cass, really. Pulitzer-worthy takedown. But then I scrolled to the comments, saw the photos someone leaked from Dad's building security footage, and now I need one of you to tell me those aren't what they look like. Call me. Now. Security footage. Cass's mind raced through the weekend, entering the building Friday night, leaving Sunday evening the doorman who'd recognized her, the elevator that required a key card for penthouse access. Someone had pulled that footage, leaked it to precisely the outlets that would weaponize it against Nate's credibility. Victoria. It had to be. Exposed and cornered, she'd pivoted to scorched earth. Nate was already dialing. The call connected on the second ring. Meredith's voice came through the speaker, sharp enough to draw blood. Tell me it's not true. Tell me you didn't sleep with my best friend while she was investigating you. Silence stretched. Cass watched Nate's face, saw him calculating angles, weighing truths against damage control. Finally, he settled on honesty. I didn't sleep with her while she was investigating. The article was filed before we crossed that line. But Mir, I'm not going to lie to you. Cass and I were together. Have been since Friday night. The sound that came through the phone was wordless, wounded. Then, how could you, both of you? She's my best friend. You're my father. There are lines I crossed. I know. But Meredith, listen to me. This isn't some midlife crisis. This isn't me being reckless or stupid or taking advantage. Cass and I, what we have is real. She's 29. You're 48. Do the math, Dad. When I was born, she was in kindergarten. That's not real. That's disgusting. Cass flinched like she'd been struck. The words hit harder coming from Meredith than they had in her own internal arguments. She reached for the phone, voice steady despite the shaking in her hands. Mir, I know how this looks. I know what people will say. But I need you to hear this from me. I didn't pursue your father. We didn't plan this. It just happened, and once it did, we couldn't pretend it hadn't. You could have walked away. Both of you could have chosen not to betray me. How is loving someone a betrayal? The question hung in the air, unanswerable. Meredith's breathing came harsh through the speaker, ragged with tears. She was clearly fighting. I need time. I need space. Don't call me, either of you. I'll reach out when I'm ready. The line went dead. Nate set down the phone like it weighed 1,000 pounds, scrubbed his hands over his face. Cass wrapped her arms around him from behind, pressed her cheek to his shoulder blade. No words seemed adequate. They'd known this would hurt Meredith. Knowing hadn't made it easier. She'll come around. Cass didn't believe it, but saying it out loud made it feel possible. She's angry now, but she loves us both. Eventually that'll win. Eventually might be years. Nate turned, pulled her close. Can you live with that? With Meredith hating you potentially forever because of me? The question demanded honesty. Cass met his eyes, saw the fear there, not of losing his daughter, but of Cass resenting him for it. I don't know. But I know walking away from you feels worse than her anger. So we deal with the anger, together." His kiss tasted like coffee and desperation. They broke apart when his phone rang again, the board demanding his presence in an hour. Reality wouldn't wait for them to finish mourning what they'd broken. The Sterling Industries boardroom was a war zone dressed in mahogany and leather. 11 directors sat around the conference table, their expressions ranging from concerned to hostile. Nate took his seat at the head, and Robert Brennan flanked him, loyalty written in the set of his shoulders. Victoria's empty chair loomed across the table like an accusation. Charles Whitlock, the lead independent director, opened with precision strikes. "Nathaniel, we've reviewed Ms. Monroe's article. If even half of what she's documented is accurate, Victoria Whitmore has committed securities fraud on a scale that makes Enron look quaint. The question is why we're only learning about this now and why the journalist who exposed it was sleeping in your apartment all weekend." The room temperature dropped. Nate kept his expression neutral, voice level. "My personal life is irrelevant to Victoria's crimes. The article is sourced, verified, and supported by evidence Rob provided. Everything in it is accurate. Your personal life became relevant the moment it created the appearance of impropriety. You're the CEO of a publicly traded company under investigation for pension fraud, and you're romantically involved with the journalist who's writing about it. That's a conflict of interest so glaring it's visible from space. The investigation cleared Sterling. The article proves Victoria orchestrated the entire scheme to frame me. We're the victims here, not the perpetrators." Margaret Torres, the CFO of a competing firm and notoriously pragmatic, leaned forward. "The facts may support you, Nate, but optics matter. Right now, social media is exploding with conspiracy theories about you bribing a young journalist with sex to get favorable coverage. Your credibility is hemorrhaging, and it's taking Sterling's stock price with it." Rob interjected, voice tight. "With all due respect, Ms. Torres, Nate's relationship with Ms. Monroe began after her investigation concluded. The timeline is clear." "The timeline is irrelevant if the public doesn't believe it, and they won't because the age gap makes it salacious and the timing makes it suspicious." Margaret pulled up her tablet, started reading. "Billionaire CEO 48 seduces 29-year-old journalist to kill, expose." That's the headline running on 6 major outlets. Doesn't matter that it's false. Mud sticks. Nate felt the trap closing. He'd anticipated backlash, had prepared for Victoria to attack his credibility. What he hadn't fully calculated was the board turning on him, using his relationship with Cass as justification for forcing him out. "What are you proposing?" Charles exchanged glances with Margaret. "Temporary leave of absence. 6 months, maybe a year. Let the scandal die down. Let the investigation run its course. Rob can step in as interim CEO. You maintain your chairman position but step back from day-to-day operations until the optics improve." "Absolutely not." The words came out harder than Nate intended. "I built this company from nothing. I'm not walking away because Victoria weaponized my personal life." "Then we'll vote you out." Charles's voice held no malice, just inevitability. "I've spoken with 7 directors. We have the votes. You can step aside gracefully and preserve some dignity, or we can make this ugly. Your choice." The ultimatum landed like a blade. Nate looked around the table, counted the faces, avoiding his gaze. 7 votes. Exactly what they needed to remove him. Rob's expression had gone murderous, but there was nothing he could do. Corporate governance was math, and the math wasn't in their favor. "I need 24 hours. You have until tomorrow's meeting, 10 a.m. Charles stood, signaling the end of discussion. "Nate, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. You're a good CEO, but right now you're a liability we can't afford." The board filed out. Rob remained, fists clenched against the table. "This is bullshit. They're letting Victoria win. No, they're protecting the company. It's the right call." Nate gathered his papers, movements mechanical. "I knew the risks when I chose Cass. This is just the bill coming due. So what, you just roll over, let them push you out of the company you built?" "I let them protect 30,000 jobs while the scandal blows over. Then I come back." Nate met Rob's eyes. "This isn't surrender. It's strategy." Outside, the media had gathered like vultures. Cameras and microphones and reporters shouting questions designed to provoke. Nate navigated through them in silence, head down, ignoring the barrage. His car waited at the curb. He slid into the back seat and checked his phone. 17 missed calls, 12 from numbers he didn't recognize, media probably, 3 from his sister Meredith's aunt, 2 from Cass. He called Cass first. She answered on the first ring, voice tight. "Where are you?" "Leaving the office. Board wants me to resign." "Jesus. Nate, I'm sorry. This is my fault. If I hadn't published—" "Stop. You did your job. You exposed a criminal. Victoria's the one weaponizing it, not you." He leaned back, closed his eyes. "Can I come over? I need to see you." "I'm at your place. Let myself in with the spare key you gave me. Hope that's okay." The presumption should have felt invasive. Instead, it felt like relief. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. The drive through Midtown took 30. Nate spent it reading the coverage, watching his reputation dissolve in real time. The comments were vicious accusations of grooming, of predation, of using wealth and power to coerce a woman barely out of her 20s. Never mind that Cass was 29 and fully autonomous. Never mind that she'd pursued the truth despite their attraction. Facts didn't matter when the narrative was juicier. He found Cass in the living room, laptop open, surrounded by notes. She'd been writing, he realized. Another article probably. Defending him or herself or both. She looked up when he entered, and the exhaustion in her face made his chest ache. "Don't step down." No preamble, just certainty. "I know what the board said. Don't do it." "I don't have a choice. They have the votes." "Then we fight. We go public, we tell our side, we make it worse." Nate sat beside her, took her hands. "Cass, the more we defend this, the guiltier we look. The board's right. I need to step back, let the temperature drop. 6 months, maybe a year. Then I come back when the scandal's not front-page news." Tears welled in her eyes. "This is my fault. I should have kept my distance, should have waited until when? Until Meredith gave her blessing, until the age difference didn't exist. There was never going to be a good time." He cupped her face, thumbs brushing away tears. "I regret nothing. Not pursuing you, not this weekend, not any of it. If the price of having you is stepping away from Sterling for a while, I'll pay it." "That's not a small price, Nate. That company is your legacy. You're my present. The company can wait." The words settled between them, too large and true to take back. Cass kissed him, salt and desperation, and the particular intimacy of people choosing each other despite consequences. When they broke apart, she pulled her laptop onto her knees. "I've been tracking Victoria's response. She's hired a crisis management firm, top tier. They're pushing the narrative that you orchestrated this entire thing, seduced me, fed me a story, manipulated the evidence to destroy her out of revenge. People believe that. Enough people that it's trending on 3 platforms. But Nate, I have proof it's false. Time-stamped emails showing when I received Victoria's documents, when I started my investigation, when Rob contacted me. I can publish a timeline that proves we didn't get involved until after the article was filed, which makes us look defensive, like we're scrambling to justify something we're ashamed of." Nate closed the laptop gently. "Let it go. The people who matter know the truth. Everyone else, they're going to believe what they want, regardless of evidence. I'm a journalist. Evidence is supposed to matter. It does. In courtrooms and congressional hearings. In the court of public opinion, it's just noise." He pulled her close, felt her resistance melt. "We can't win this fight, Cass. Not right now. So we wait. We let Victoria exhaust herself, let the media find a new scandal to feed on, and we focus on what actually matters us, and convincing Meredith we're not monsters." The fight drained out of her. Cass leaned into him, exhausted and defeated, and still trying to fix what might be irreparable. "Meredith won't talk to me. I've called 6 times. She's blocked my number. She blocked mine too. But I talked to my sister. Catherine's with her in Boston, keeping her from doing anything rash. She says Meredith's not ready yet, but she's listening. That's something." "Is it enough?" "It has to be." They sat there as afternoon faded to evening, the city lights beginning their nightly emergence. Nate's phone rang once more, Charles Whitlock, confirming tomorrow's vote, offering condolences that rang hollow. Nate accepted it with grace he didn't feel and began mentally preparing for the walk away from everything he'd built. The board meeting at 10 a.m. was mercifully brief. Nate submitted his resignation as CEO, effective immediately, retaining his chairman position and board seat. The vote to accept was unanimous, a small mercy that suggested they hadn't completely turned on him. Robert Brennan was confirmed as interim CEO, with a narrower margin 8-3, the dissent coming from Victoria's old allies. Nate cleaned out his office in silence. 30 years of work reduced to boxes. The lucky steel beam piece came down last, wrapped in newspaper like a relic from an excavation. He carried it himself, refusing help, needing to feel the weight of what he was leaving behind. Outside, the media scrum had only intensified. Nate made a brief statement, resigned to protect the company, full confidence in Rob's leadership. No regrets about his personal choices. The reporters shouted follow-ups about Cass, about the age difference, about whether he'd bribed her for favorable coverage. He ignored them all, climbed into his car, and drove to Brooklyn. Cass's apartment was a fifth-floor walk-up in a building that had character the way abandoned warehouses had character. Nate climbed the stairs, knocked on the door marked 5C. She answered in sweatpants and one of his shirts, eyes red from crying or lack of sleep or both. "You shouldn't be here. The media will find you." "Let them." He stepped inside, took in the studio that was roughly the size of his bedroom closet. Books everywhere, a Murphy bed half folded, the red notebook open on a desk barely large enough to hold her laptop. This was her world, stripped of the glamour his penthouse implied, real and small and honest. "I resigned this morning. Rob's running Sterling now." Cass closed the door, leaned against it. "God, Nate, I'm so sorry." "Stop apologizing. This isn't your fault." He set down the steel beam piece on her desk beside the red notebook. "I brought you something. Symbolic passing of the torch or whatever." She picked it up, turned it over in her hands. "This is from your first project. Now it's from our first project. The one where you saved my company and destroyed my career in the same week." The attempt at humor fell flat. Cass set down the beam, crossed to him, wrapped her arms around his waist. "What do we do now?" "Now." Nate held her close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, feeling the realness of her against him. "Now we wait for the storm to pass. I keep my head down, you keep writing, and we prove to everyone, starting with Meredith, that this wasn't a mistake. And if Meredith never forgives us..." The question had haunted him since Monday morning. Nate had no answer that didn't hurt. "Then we live with that, and hope time heals what honesty broke." 3 weeks passed. The media moved on to fresher scandals, a senator's affair, a cryptocurrency collapse, the usual rotation of public destruction. Victoria's legal troubles intensified. Federal prosecutors had opened an investigation into her shell companies, the pension fraud, a decade of schemes Cass's article had exposed. She'd be fighting charges for years, possibly facing prison time. Nate should have felt vindicated. Instead, he felt hollow. Sterling was thriving under Rob's leadership, the stock price recovering as the scandal faded. But Nate's inbox was full of opportunities he couldn't pursue. Board positions offered, then rescinded when sponsors learned about Cass, speaking engagements canceled because event planners didn't want the controversy. He'd become radioactive. Not unemployable, but tainted. The kind of reputation damage that took years to repair, if it ever fully did. Cass was navigating her own fallout. The article had won her a journalism award, but also death threats from Victoria's supporters and accusations of ethical violations from journalists who saw the relationship as proof of bias. Her editor had stood by her, but barely. The next article she pitched got rejected for being too aggressive, which was code for "we're nervous about giving you controversial assignments." They spent most nights at Nate's place, occasionally at hers when the walls closed in. Meredith remained silent despite Catherine's attempts at mediation. The longer the silence stretched, the more permanent it felt. Then 6 weeks after the article published, Nate's phone rang with a Boston number he recognized. Meredith. His hand shook as he answered. "Dad?" Her voice was quiet, scraped raw. "I'm coming down this weekend. We need to talk. You and me and Cass. All three of us." Relief and terror warred in his chest. "Okay. When?" "Saturday, noon. Aunt Catherine suggested neutral ground, so we're meeting at her place in Connecticut. She's offered to mediate if things get ugly. Mare, I know you're angry. I'm not angry anymore, Dad. I'm sad and confused, and I need to understand how this happened before I can figure out if I can forgive it. A pause thick with unspoken pain. I've lost enough people. I don't want to lose you both too, but I need to know this is real, that it's not just I don't know. Midlife crisis meets daddy issues. The accusation stung because part of him had wondered the same thing in darker moments. It's real, sweetheart. I promise you it's real. Then prove it. Saturday, both of you. The line went dead. Nate immediately called Cass, relayed the conversation. Her response was immediate. I'll be there. Whatever she needs to hear, I'll say it. Saturday arrived wrapped in October cold, the kind that promised winter wasn't far behind. Catherine's house in Greenwich was quintessential Connecticut colonial architecture, established trees, the sort of generational wealth that whispered rather than shouted. She met them at the door, her resemblance to Nate softened by age and a gentler disposition. She's in the living room. Fair warning, she's been crying all morning. Be kind. Meredith sat on a cream-colored sofa, hands wrapped around a mug of tea, eyes swollen. She looked younger than 30, fragile in a way that made Nate's chest constrict. This was his daughter, the girl he'd raised alone, who'd survived her mother's death and adolescence and every challenge that came after. And he'd hurt her to be with a woman she'd trusted. Cass moved first, sitting in the chair across from Meredith. Nate took the other end of the sofa, careful not to crowd. Catherine disappeared into the kitchen, giving them space. Meredith set down her tea, met Cass's eyes first. I've spent 6 weeks trying to understand how my best friend could betray me like this. The only explanation that makes sense is that you've always had feelings for my dad and just hid them better than I realized. That's not... Cass stopped, recalibrated. Okay, that's partially true. I was attracted to him at your graduation. I buried it because it was inappropriate and impossible. When I interviewed him for the article, those feelings came back. I tried to ignore them again. I failed. When did you fail? Friday night after dinner, after I'd already filed the article, after the investigation was complete. We kissed. Everything else happened after that. Meredith turned to Nate. And you? When did you start seeing her as more than my friend? The question demanded honesty. Nate held his daughter's gaze, refusing to hide. 7 years ago at your graduation. She shook my hand and I felt something I had no right to feel. I buried it. Spent 7 years not thinking about her. Then she walked into my office and it was like no time had passed. The attraction was immediate and unwelcome and undeniable. So you've both been lying to me for 7 years? No. Cass leaned forward, urgent. I haven't lied. I've distracted myself, I've dated other people trying to make it go away. But I never acted on it until last month, and I never lied to you about it. Omission is a lie, Cass. The rebuke landed hard. Cass flinched, but didn't retreat. You're right. I should have told you years ago that I found your father attractive. But Mare, what would that have accomplished except making everything awkward? It was a crush. It wasn't supposed to become this. But it did become this. And now I have to watch my best friend date my father, watch him look at you the way he used to look at my mom and pretend I'm okay with it. Meredith's voice cracked. Do you have any idea how that feels? Like you're trying to replace her? Nate's composure shattered. God, no. Meredith, no one could replace your mother. What I feel for Cass, it's different. It's not better or worse, just different. Your mom and I built a life together, had you grew up together in a lot of ways. Cass and I were meeting as adults with fully formed lives. It's not a replacement. It's a second chance. A second chance with someone barely older than me. She's 29. You're 30. That's not barely older. It's close enough that people assume we're the same generation. That when you're 70, she'll be 51 and I'll be 52 and we'll all be dealing with your aging together like some weird sister-wife situation. Meredith stood paced to the window. I know you're adults. I know you can make your own choices. But Dad, she was my roommate. We shared secrets and inside jokes and a bathroom the size of a closet. And now she's sharing your bed. How am I supposed to process that? Cass stood too cross to Meredith. "I don't know. I wish I had an answer that made this easier. But Mir, I love him. Not because he's wealthy or powerful or your father. I love him because he's kind and brilliant, and he sees me as an equal even when the world doesn't. And I know that complicates our friendship, maybe destroys it, but I can't unlove him to make things simpler." The declaration hung in the air. Meredith turned, tears streaming. "Do you love her, Dad? Really love her? Or is this just loneliness and attraction and good timing?" Nate stood, moved to his daughter, took her hands. "I love her. More than I thought I'd ever love anyone again. And sweetheart, I know that's hard to hear. I know it feels like I'm choosing her over you. But love isn't finite. Loving Cass doesn't diminish what I feel for you. Then why does it feel like I'm losing you both? Because change is terrifying even when it's good." Nate pulled her into an embrace, felt her resistance dissolve into sobs. "But you're not losing me. You'll never lose me. I'm still your father. That doesn't change." Meredith cried against his shoulder for long minutes. Cass stood apart, giving them space, her own tears silent. When Meredith finally pulled back, she wiped her face, looked between them. "I need conditions. If we're going to try to make this work, and I'm not saying I can, but if we try, I need boundaries. Anything." Nate would have agreed to sacrifice limbs if it meant keeping his daughter. "Name them." "No public displays of affection in front of me. I don't want to see you hold hands or kiss or any of that. Not yet. Maybe not ever." "Done. You don't move in together until I've had at least a year to adjust. I need time before this becomes permanent." Nate glanced at Cass. She nodded agreement. "Okay, we keep separate places for now. And you both have to go to therapy, together and separately, because this—" Meredith gestured between them. "This is weird and complicated, and I need to know you're taking it seriously enough to do the work." "We'll start this week." Cass's voice was steady despite the tears. "Whatever it takes, Mare, I'll do it." Meredith looked at them both for a long moment, then sighed. "I'm not promising forgiveness. I'm promising to try. That's the best I can do right now." "That's enough." Nate felt something unclenched in his chest, the first real breath in 6 weeks. "That's more than enough." Catherine reappeared with sandwiches and the kind of forced normalcy that families deployed in crisis. They ate lunch in careful conversation, avoiding the raw topics, focusing on safer ground. Meredith's nonprofit work, Rob's leadership at Sterling, the investigative series Cass was pitching about corporate malfeasance. By 3 p.m., Meredith announced she needed to head back to Boston. She hugged her father, tentative but real, and surprised Cass with an embrace that lasted 5 seconds longer than strictly necessary. "I meant what I said. I'm trying. Don't make me regret it." "We won't." Cass held on tight. "I promise." The drive back to Manhattan was quiet. Nate held Cass's hand across the center console, processing what they'd survived. Meredith hadn't forgiven them, but she hadn't disowned them either. It was a beginning, fragile and conditional, and more than they'd dared hope for. 6 months later, Nathaniel Ashford stood in a construction site in the Bronx, hard hat on, sleeves rolled up, supervising the groundbreaking for the Ashford Monroe Foundation. The nonprofit would provide scholarships for children of blue-collar workers, fund trade schools, support families devastated by corporate pension fraud. Cass had designed the mission. Nate had funded it. Together they'd built something that honored both their fathers, her dad's stolen pension, his dad's stolen dignity. The media covered it, but the angle had shifted. No longer scandal, now human interest. Billionaire and journalist team up to fight corporate corruption. The age gap still generated comments, but fewer. Victoria Whitmore's trial was scheduled for fall, and public sentiment had firmly turned against her. Sterling Industries was thriving. Rob had proven himself capable, and Nate's chairman role kept him connected without the daily grind. He'd discovered he liked having time to mentor young entrepreneurs, time to build the foundation, time to be with Cass without the pressure of running an empire. Meredith had kept her word. She was trying. Monthly dinners where she joined them sometimes with her new boyfriend, a public defender who made her laugh. The awkwardness had faded to something manageable. She still didn't want to see them kiss, still maintained boundaries. But she'd stopped crying when she talked about them, stopped looking at Cass like she'd stolen something irreplaceable. Progress was slow. It was also real. The groundbreaking ceremony ended with speeches and photos. Cass stood beside Nate, both of them covered in ceremonial dirt, smiling at cameras that no longer felt predatory. A reporter shouted a question about their wedding plans. Nate deflected with practiced ease. Later in his apartment, Cass kicked off her heels and collapsed onto the couch. "Think Meredith will ever be ready to see us get married?" "Eventually, maybe." Nate joined her, pulled her close. "Does it matter?" "Yes and no. I want her blessing. But I also want you more than I want her approval." The honesty still surprised him even after 6 months of living in it. Nate tilted her face up, kissed her with the ease of people who'd earned their intimacy through fire. "For what it's worth, I bought a ring 3 weeks ago. It's in my sock drawer waiting for the right moment." Cass pulled back, eyes wide. "You what?" "Bought a ring. I'm 49 years old. I've done this before. I know what I want, and I want to marry you. But only when Meredith's ready to watch it happen without feeling like she's losing her family." Tears welled in Cass's eyes. "That might take years." "Then we'll wait years. I'm not going anywhere." He wiped away the tears with his thumb. "We've already survived the worst. Everything else is just details." She kissed him, then fierce and grateful and full of the particular certainty that came from choosing someone despite knowing exactly what it cost. Outside, Manhattan glittered in the growing dark. Inside, two people who'd found each other across age and scandal and impossible circumstances held on tight and refused to let go. 1 year later, Meredith stood in a garden in Connecticut watching her father marry her best friend. She wore navy blue and a smile that was almost natural. Aunt Catherine officiated. Robert Brennan served as best man. Cass's editor stood as maid of honor, a compromise when Meredith had gently declined the position. The ceremony was small, intimate, focused on vows that acknowledged the journey. Nate promised to honor the trust Cass had placed in him, to never make her choose between love and integrity. Cass promised to see him fully, to challenge him when he needed it, to build a partnership that respected both their strengths. When they kissed, Meredith didn't look away. Small victory. Significant progress. At the reception, she pulled Cass aside, champagne in hand. "I'm still processing this. Probably will be for years. But I want you to know I see how happy he is, how happy you both are. And that matters more than my discomfort." Cass felt her throat tighten. "Thank you. For trying. For being here. For not giving up on us. I didn't do it for you. I did it for me. Because losing both of you would have broken me, and I've been broken enough." Meredith clinked her glass against Cass's. "But for what it's worth, I'm glad you make each other happy, even if the math still makes me want to vomit." They laughed then, real and unforced, and Cass felt the last piece of ice around her heart melt. This wasn't perfect. Probably never would be. But it was real and hard-won, and more than she'd believed possible when she'd walked into Nathaniel Ashford's office 18 months ago. The reception continued into evening. Nate found Cass on the terrace looking out over Catherine's garden, 30 years old now, and carrying his ring on her finger. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, chin on her shoulder. Regrets. Not even one. She turned in his embrace, met his eyes. "You. Only that I waited 7 years to kiss you." The moment stretched perfect and fragile. Then someone called them back for cake cutting, and they returned to the celebration hand in hand. The road ahead would have challenges, always did, but they'd faced worse and survived. Together they could handle whatever came next. In the end, love wasn't about age or appropriateness or following rules. It was about finding someone who saw you fully and chose you anyway. About building something real in the wreckage of scandal. About refusing to apologize for wanting what you wanted when it hurt no one but the gossipers. Nathaniel and Cassandra Ashford had paid the price for their choices. And standing together in the aftermath, they'd discovered that some things, some people were worth every consequence.